What if I told you the first quarter moon is actually just as important as the new moon and the full moon? So this is a week unlike any other to take a look at the first quarter moon in the sky. That's what happens the week in between a new moon and a full moon. At a first quarter of the moon is 90 degrees away from both the sun and the moon, and it's in between, right? In between where it started and where it'll reach its peak. So this is a growing square, which means we have something to express out of us, something that feels a little bit frustrating, or the real idea in this 90-degree first quarter square is that it's very vulnerable. And we look to the sign where the moon is in to get a better sense of this vulnerable decision that we need to make. So that's what I want to share about in this video. This is perfecting at around 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday. So let's look at this. Here's what I'm talking about. This is the moon, and you see these squares right here. That's a square. That's a square to the sun in Cancer. At the very final degrees of Cancer, we know it's a first quarter square because both the sun and the moon are at 28 degrees. And the moon moves this way in the sky. So what this first quarter square and the interpretation I'm going to give you is riding on, in particular, is the full moon that happens in Aquarius, which will be next week. But in order to get there, we actually need to make a decision tomorrow on Tuesday. So what is that decision that we are making? Well, I'll break it down for you astrologically, but before I do that, I want you to think for yourself, where are you feeling the most tension right now? Where are you feeling is the place that you are growing into the most, especially in the context of a vision that you have, a pretty imminent vision for what you want to achieve. Now, if that's too far beyond you, you can think about what happened at the new moon that was in the sign of Cancer a week ago, last week, so in the middle of July. And that new moon in Cancer was something very deep and very emotional that we restarted, that we were thinking about. We probably weren't thinking about this for the first time in our life because Mercury was right there and it is retrograde, which means there are old thoughts that are coming back to us, things to reconsider in the sign of Cancer, which is about our deepest sense of emotional self, our deepest sense of safety, and our home, and what it really is for us to grow and to nurture ourselves in an authentic way. So what does that mean about this decision that we have to make today on Tuesday then? Well, it's happening in the sign of Libra. So if you think about it, Libra is kind of midway between Cancer and the opposite sign of Cancer, which is Capricorn. Cancer famously is like the mother. Capricorn is famously like the father. And what unites the mother and the father is their relationship to each other, right? Libra is about relationship. It's about balance. It's about diplomacy. So when we have any square between Libra and Cancer, we have to take into consideration the emotional reality of a very significant relationship that we have in our lives. And so there is likely, at the point of this first quarter square, an important relationship in our lives that we are getting to make an emotional decision about. And somehow that decision, the emotional decision we are making within a partnership, someone that we are feeling very connected to emotionally, this could be a family member, a partner, could also be a business partner, just someone we feel very deeply emotionally aligned with and connected to. We are making a decision that's going to help us grow into a community, because that's a full moon in Aquarius. We're not going to look at that chart. We're going to stay with this chart, but keep that in mind. So let's get more info on this decision. The moon in Libra is ruled by Venus. Venus is the ruler of Libra. And Venus is right now transiting through the sign of Virgo, which makes her very detail-oriented. And Venus is what we are open to. It's what we love. It's what we enjoy. Venus is not only how we socially relate to other people and enjoy our social life, but it's also the physical pleasure, the sensory reality that we live that is so subjective, the things that we like the preferences that we have. In the sign of Virgo, all of these things, relationships, love, money, beauty, these are in an enormously discerning sign. So there is a process that we are actually enjoying going through right now, a very dexterous process that we're working through with our partner or within a relationship right now. But here's the other catch. If you look, Venus herself is in a first quarter square to another planet, which is Mars. So this is definitely, at this case, a relationship that was likely started earlier this year in the beginning of January. That's when Venus made its conjunction to Mars. So just like the sun and the moon, all planets have phasal relationships to each other, whereby you discern at what stage within a larger cycle you are at within the thematics of these two planets. So for example, Venus and Mars are the famous lovers, right? And so as we see that externally in our lives, these are significant relationships or a significant relationship. And beyond the external, this is the way we are relating to ourselves. So there is a brave decision we are making from within ourselves and within a relationship to really work with the devil in the details, if you will. And the thing is, Mars is down there in Gemini. Now, Gemini is not as detail-oriented as Virgo is, but Gemini sure wants to take action on some data. Mars and Gemini definitely has something to say and is instigating Venus to be very specific about what she loves. So Venus is the one under more pressure right now because she has to move beyond Mars, but maintain a relationship. This isn't about stopping being in a relationship. This is about sharing something vulnerable that's been being prepared as Venus has been traveling this way. Okay, so that's the first quarter square, and we also have the first quarter square between the sun and the moon. So the moon has also been traveling this way. We have something very vulnerable to push out of ourselves, or a relationship wants to work on something vulnerable, and that has to do with some type of process, some type of artistic process, even something dexterous, something like alchemical, almost like you are using a process to create something very big. And I say the creation because we have the Jupiter-Pluto opposition, which will have just made its exact over the previous 24 hours to this. Also, Jupiter-Neptune trine going exact in the previous 24 hours to this, which means that this moon really is here to like socially move our creative work forward. Okay, so the last thing here is that all of these planets, both Venus and Mars, are ruled by Mercury, which is still retrograde in Cancer. Now, Mercury moves direct on Thursday, which means that we are straightening out some process of reflection, some emotional reflection that began last month in June, and the emotional reflection that really began this lunar cycle as well. There's a very deep emotional process that we've been going through, which has everything to do with self-advocacy, emotional self-advocacy, speaking up for yourself when it is difficult, when it is vulnerable, because we see Mercury here in its own first quarter square to Saturn, right? It's just beyond that first quarter square, 16 to 14, right? But what that means is Mercury has said something vulnerable. We have returned to something quite vulnerable, and we have said it out loud in a like something very soft, and it is going up against the authority within ourselves with Saturn and Aries, an authority that really wants us to take responsibility for ourselves. We have had to have an intimate conversation and speak up for ourselves, right? And that speaking up, that is the base from which we are working in this emotional relationship, from which we are working out this process, this creative process, from which we are really stepping into this big transformer suit. That's how I feel. So what is the status of the biggest relationships in your life right now? Are you feeling pressure build? And the final thing I'll say here is that right in the days after this first quarter square exacts, the sun moves into Leo and the moon moves into Scorpio. So this is a vibe shift. Scorpio and moon transiting through Scorpio are famously times of deepening, where you go into the muck so that you can emotionally process. But it's not just that, because in this time, the moon will be perfecting its square to both Pluto and Jupiter, which are in an opposition to each other. This is called a T-square, which puts an enormous amount of pressure on this little moon here that's already moving through a very, very deep sign. Okay? So there's a lot of psychic pressure that we will be stepping into once this emotional decision is made very soon, tomorrow on Tuesday, right? And the thing is, we have to grow in some areas and we need to really let go in others. The way we need to let go is actually in how we are undercutting and we are really self-sabotaging our place within a larger community. The moon making a square to Pluto. This is the last quarter square because the moon's moving this way, which means the moon, by the time it is in Scorpio here, will have moved 270 degrees all the way this way, which means it's closing out its cycle to Pluto. Okay, so relative to our emotional body and the relationship that we are in right now and the big decisions we're making within it, we are actually letting go of what we thought community was for, who we thought we are. And in that process, we are also trusting and leaning more into our creative wisdom and our capacity to teach from the heart. That's because the moon is moving away from Jupiter. The moon is in that first quarter square to Jupiter once it enters into Scorpio. So leave some comments down below if this is not making sense to you. I hope that it is. Phasal relationships are truly one of the more powerful ways to read astrology because they are enormously precise to timing. No two squares are the same, and every two planets are in relationship to each other. And so there are cycles within cycles going on. Now, this is the approach I take to all the astrology that I do. If you get a personal reading with me, this is the way I approach it, by the rulerships and the phases of the planets in your chart. If you want to get a bigger, more specific taste for this, I'm hosting a workshop, a webinar with Jen from Full Cup Astrology, where we are going to look specifically at the relationship between Saturn and Neptune in your natal chart by phase, which means, are they in a first quarter phase? Are they opposing each other? Are they in a last quarter phase to each other? We'll talk about how to identify the phases in your birth chart and also give you an entry point for interpreting that in your own life. It is a webinar, so we will be giving you some time to actually do some journaling and free writing and sharing. So if you'd like to join that, links are in the description below. Would love to see you there. That's very soon. That's next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So I hope this helps for this week. Definitely, it is a major tone set, and it is very dynamic. This is not a decision we will linger in. This is a decision that will bring us into that deeper Scorpio realm. And eventually, once the moon moves into Sagittarius through Capricorn, we'll hit that Aquarius full moon, and we will see something very, very complete, very big, and very bright about the communities in our lives and how we are showing up and giving that Jupiter wisdom from our Leo hearts to this big illumination, this big change that's happening in the communities in our lives. So I hope you have a lovely week ahead, and until the next time, goodbye for now.